Hi there, it's Joe Miller, and you are watching All Things Grants, the place to be to get grants and do good. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever been asked by a funder for a brief 1 or 2 page concept paper on a project they'll consider before a proposal? Yikes. Well, where do you start? How do you start? That's what we're going to be talking about today. My guest today is here to help us. Now, on All Things Grants, we are talking about concept papers and how they fit into your proposal process. So, as the president and owner at Velocity Inc., Kim provides grant writing services, strategic planning services to progressive nonprofit organizations. She is the author of Fix It and Get Funded, 10 do-it-yourself repairs for grant proposals. And she serves as an adjunct faculty at the University of Southern California's Sol Price School of Public Policy, where she teaches grant writing classes. She lives in Los Angeles, I'm jealous, with her husband and 2 children. Kim, thank you for being here today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Joe. I really appreciate it.
It is our pleasure. Now, I know that the grant writing community and all the grant professionals out there that we're connected to were really interested in this topic. And we had some great responses on Grant Chat. I cannot wait for your blog post to get out there and see what kind of interaction we have and have this video to be live so that we can have some more conversations with that community. So let's get started.
Okay.
At the beginning of this whole thing, we want to look at what in the world is a concept paper. Can you define that for me?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and I don't know that I have a great answer because it seems to be very different things to different people, which makes a lot of sense. My first encounter with concept papers was when clients were being asked by their funders, usually by foundations that had closed processes, right? That they, invitation only, this wasn't, competitive in the sense of an open competition where anyone could submit. It was they called my client and said, we want a concept paper on this, or they met with the client and said, that sounds like a great idea, give me a concept paper. And they came back to me going, they need a concept paper. And I said, oh, sure, okay, I'll do that. Over the years, I've kind of tried to figure it out. But as we learned today, also there's some folks that use concept papers internally to help them develop a concept or a program or a plan. And they use that as a document to kind of help them get everybody on board, make sure everyone's working with the same assumptions and everyone's got the questions answered before they take that and to other funders for submission. So it's being used in a bunch of different ways. And some funders are using it as a replacement for an LOI process. And others, it's like the pre-proposal kind of thing. It's a lot of different ways that people are using it. So
I love it. So my second question is, how did you get interested in concept papers and in teaching or telling people about concept papers?
I think it was probably in part my own confusion about them, like, hey, who else has got into this and what do you do? So today's grant chat was great for me because I learned a lot. It was also frankly, a great excuse for me to call different program officers and say, okay, you use this process. Will you tell me a little bit more about why and how you use the concept paper and if you treat it differently? And so so that's what kind of interested me about it. And then I also had this experience, which I talk about in the blog post, about a time that I wrote a concept paper for a funder. They loved it and asked me to put the exact thing into their proposal format, and then they hated it. And I thought that was really, really interesting. So it's just a kind of weird anomaly.
I find that to be really interesting in the blog post that, putting it in a concept paper and then putting it in the grant application. And then my question to the funder what I would want to ask the funder is, how many times do you think you've done that? How many times do you think you might have because of limited space and the format, you have limited passion. You have limited the story. You don't get to understand and feel what it is that we feel when we're out there doing this project and the impact that we're having on community, because impact is about feeling, it's about real change. It's about feeling that pulse of change. And it's very hard to do that sometimes in our grant applications. So great.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. And I think that's it was a really telling experience for me. You could see that it was really emblazoned in my memory. I had gone to the Nonprofit Storytelling Conference in
Yes.
Seattle last year, and one of the statistics that they pulled out, a study that they pulled out, said which will raise more money. An appeal letter. These were all appeal letters, so it's not a grant proposal, but an appeal letter that's only about a story. That all it does is tell a story and then makes the ask at the end. One that tells the statistics about the issue, asks at the end, and then one that does both, a combination of story and statistics. And the one that raised the most money was pure story.
Wow.
The one that raised the least was story and statistics.
Huh.
And I found that to be really upsetting. And I even raised it as a question at the conference. This is really disheartening, because as a grant writer,
right,
then that means that the type of writing that we're using and the way that proposals are structured and the conventions towards statistics and limited amounts of story really don't allow us to engage with people in a way that they want to fund us. And so it made me think that grant proposals are inherently structured to be non-persuasive.
wow.
There's a bias towards against feeling persuaded by a proposal.
Yes. Well, that's a whole nother conversation for us.
Yeah.
But I think you've really struck a chord here with something that has happened, and I believe that that's been maybe subconsciously very purposeful, because you want to be logical about these grants, particularly when you're spending taxpayers' dollars or your investments. You want to be very, very logical. So don't pull my heartstrings. And in that, we've lost the humanity, and grants are about humanity. So that is I think we've come up with another topic somehow to go for next time. I think we could spend hours talking about that. It's just brilliant. So thank you for sharing that and for bringing that up. And I think that we should pursue that further beyond concept papers. But how can we do better with grants? And I will say that, my thought about that, and what I try and teach people, is that your grant proposal isn't the end all anymore. Your funder is going to go to your website. So with that information that we have, tell the stories. Have those on your website. So again, that's a whole nother topic for us about, is the format of grants and what the way grants have developed and changed over the years. Because even in the time that I've done grants, which actually is a very long time, 20 years, we used to be able to tell stories. And now we can't. So fascinating. So let me get to my next question. Get us back on track here on concept papers. Which is, how do you approach writing a concept paper? Do you find them to be a lot different than a letter of intent, an LOI, or do you find them to be similar, or both?
LOIs, I tend to think about introducing an entire organization and its body of work to a funder. A concept paper, I really do think of it as, or at least this is what I've usually encountered with my clients, is that they've had a conversation with the funder already. They've already been in the program officer's office, or there's been a site visit. They're already interested in funding, but they have something specific. So that specific that they want to fund. And it's not just about that the program, that they want to fund a specific program, but there might be a particular element to it, or there might be a particular angle that's really going to help them essentially sell it to their trustees. That there's something in particular that that they want to make sure gets across. And so I think usually in the sort of that creative moment in the conversation where there is, as someone mentioned in the grant chat, a real philanthropic partnership between the funder and the organization, that they get excited about something like, yeah, let's put that in a concept paper. And so I think for me, that's kind of the difference that I see between the two. And then I think too that with concept papers, there is a kind of assumption from from funders that it is a more casual piece, that it's more brainstorming, that it shouldn't take a whole lot of time to do. But the reality is, from the grant writer's perspective, is that you need to have a solid program in place already and behind it, or an idea or a plan or something, with a fair amount of detail, because you're going to be evaluated in just the same way as your proposal will.
Absolutely.
And it's a formal communication with your funders. So you don't want to be too, hey, let's do this. What about this, or what about this? We did try actually to do some of those more informal things when we thought it was okay, and all those ideas just tanked right away. And so, and I don't think it left the greatest impression with funders. So, use my experience for that. Yeah.
We use a lot of logic models with many of our programs, and I see that as being part of, we weren't calling it a concept paper at the time, but what we would do is we would have the logic model on one page, and we would have a description that kind of was more of a story behind the logic model. And I think that those two can go hand in hand, but you really have, it might be a one-page bullet point logic model and a one-page bullet point concept paper, but they're solid. You can walk through, and that output that you have there, now you can go write your 25-page huge description and your huge budget and everything, but you're still going to get that same result with the same inputs and everything else. So yeah, you're right. It's nice that they want to save us time and effort, but we still have to do the work, and our programs still have to do the work. Our organizations do that. It has to be some strategic planning involved.
Yeah, I agree.
Great point. So do you have a specific format or framework that you use when you write a concept paper? Any particular thing that you do?
I tend to write a little bit more free flow, because I think that helps me with the persuasive element of it. And then afterwards, when I go back, I try to identify the parts of the proposal. I want to make sure that my needs statement is in there, that I have supporting evidence in there, that I've got, the program plan in there, and goals and objectives and outcomes and, timelines and things like that. So all of those pieces that you would normally put into a proposal, afterwards, I make sure that it's there. But in the beginning, I kind of do actually approach it a little bit like a speech, that I'm talking to the program officer, and then I keep whittling it down until it's a lot shorter, but I want to get my most persuasive elements in there. That being said, if they're just asking for bullet points and stuff, there are a lot of times that it's really clear that they just want, straight facts. They don't, they want to remove that persuasive element.
Yes.
So the persuasive element really does need to be in that needs statement, and the story that you tell there about why it's so needed in the community, and the power of the outcome that you intend to get at the end of it. Yeah.
Excellent. So what does an application tell you about the funder you are applying
to? So this has always been another one of those sort of tricks up my sleeve, is that I can tell a lot about a funder by the application that they put forward. So with government grant proposals, after a while, I could really tell like who had experience writing RFPs and who didn't, right. Which I'm sure you know, right? We're like, oh man.
Yeah.
Your criteria and your questions just don't line up at all. You're not going to get the answers that you need, right? So you can tell the amount of experience they have. I usually can get a sense of the kinds of assumptions that they make about the work that organizations do. If it's more charitable leaning versus advocacy work versus organizing, because a lot of my clients are organizing
Mhm.
groups. So I can get a sense of politics just based on the types of questions that they ask. And then, yeah, there's just, I don't know, you read enough of them, you get a sense, a flavor of what that organization's like and what they care about just by asking, right? So if they
Absolutely.
ask a lot about budgets and outcomes, and you're like, okay, this is that kind of funder,
Right.
right? Or that their trustees really care about that, even if it's in a little bit of conflict with the conversations or the sense of personality you get from the program officer. Ultimately, they have to, respond back to their trustees, and so this is the information that they need to convince those folks. So,
Absolutely. Great points.
yeah.
Very, very good points. So when you're writing, do you prefer to write in a structured way, like an application, or do you like more free form, like the concept paper?
Yeah, I really do. When I get the chance to write more freeform, I like doing that. In part because so many of my clients are working on organizing campaigns that, for me, there is a lot of personal passion behind my work with them. So I really enjoy being able to do that. But I'll tell you, there's nothing that gets my brain going like a question. And so when they ask a question, it makes it a lot easier to be able to write. So there's a little bit of both. But I think it helps a lot at some point to be able to write more free form, especially when you're developing uh, need statements and that sort of thing. So yeah.
Great point. Great point. And even on our chat, we found different personalities, and some people really love, that very structured grant application. And those of us that love federal grants, we found, tended to lean that way. And those are extremely structured,
Yeah.
but they are, you do dig into those nuances. What are they really looking for and everything? But it is more of I can check that box off. It's
Mm-hmm.
not as persuasive per se. It really isn't.
Yeah.
It's, I can check all the boxes, yes or no. And so it is a very different style of writing. And again, it goes back to how we've lost the story element in many
Yeah.
pieces.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and I do find that the more you get into those federal or government grants, you lose a little bit of that creativity. You unlearn it. You learn
Mm-hmm.
to not do it, and I think that's an issue for a lot of grant professionals, because then they lose their passion too, because
Yeah.
now it's all about numbers, and it's not really about why we got into it in the first place, is making a difference. Like we say, get grants, do good. Always want to do good. So very, very fascinating discussion, Kim. I love talking to you.
Well, and you happen to be also previewing the next time I'm on Grant Chat, which is when we were going to talk about grants and creativity. So, uh,
Yes.
yeah.
Love it. Love it. So anytime you want to come on, of course, you're always invited. But this has been really, really fantastic. And I appreciate you being with us today and the last time. And I appreciate how open you are to sharing tips, to sharing your ideas. We loved having real stories of times that you've asked the program officer, and you actually went out and aggressively sought that for this particular dialogue. And I think that's extremely helpful, because many of us are intimidated about approaching program officers out of the blue. So having a reason to ask them a very specific question, I think, is good for both sides. I also think that sometimes we aren't sure if we can share our stories, particularly for consultants. So being able to share the stories and get the stories from each other, I think, is incredibly important in our profession. So we really appreciate that. And I have a feeling there will be a lot of people kind of incorporating the concepts that you shared here today in their proposal development process, in telling more of a story. I know I will. I'm really going to go back and look at this and think more. You've triggered a lot of, I think, changes in my thinking, or more ahas, where I'm like, oh, that's what's been missing, and that's what's changed. So I really, really appreciate that. But before we let you go, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah, well, they can go to my website, which is velocityinc.com, but it's spelled INK, like the ink that comes out of a pen instead of incorporated. So, would love to see people there, and yeah, happy to if people want to respond to the blog post, and happy to keep an eye on that and respond to questions there too. So.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And you also have a new guide to writing need statements that you're working on now, right?
Yeah, I'm in the process of getting that polished up. So, there have been times that I've had clients for many, many years, and it feels like it's kind of the same stuff over and over again. And so, I had gone through and tried to figure out like what's the process that I use to kind of revamp a need statement for something that feels stale and old, and it just needs something new. And so. In that process, kind of tracked the different steps that I took and the different tools that are out there and available, and putting it together into a new guide, and hope to have it out by the end of the year.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we'll be promoting it. And you know what? Maybe you could come back on and we'll talk about it then.
That'd be great.
Excellent. Well, now, as always, the best conversations happen over at SmartEGrants.com. So go there. And for all of you here that are listening to the recording, you can go over there, make the comments on that recording. We also will have Kim's blog post over there under SmartEGrants / or SmartEGrants.com/concept paper. So you'll be able to find the blog post about this that we talked about. And if you like this video, please subscribe and share it with your friends. If you want to get more resources, please go to SmartEGrants.com. If you have a topic that you'd like us to talk about, email us at info@SmartEGrants.com and sign up for our emails and our weekly newsletter. And check us out at grantchat.org for our chats. So thank you very much for all of you watching here. Kim, thank you. Do you have any parting words?
Nope. Just keep writing those proposals and doing good things in the community. So.
Excellent.
Thanks so much, Joe. I really appreciate it.
Very welcome. And we'll catch you all later on All Things Grants next week. Take care.
Bye.